Hi everyone, I am Chirag Thakkar, Commissioning Editor at Roli Books, and you're watching this in collaboration between Roli Pulse, brought to you by Roli Books as well as Newslaundry. This is the fourth episode of our specially curated video series on the media landscape in India. If you haven't already, please go press the bell icon and subscribe to Roli Books and Newslaundry on YouTube, where you will find the other three episodes of this series. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For a while now, press freedom in India has been under attack. If you happen to not be part of a news venture that is not in the good books of the government, reporting the truth has been a lot like walking on eggshells for many. Not only will governments avoid giving you ads and tenders to critical news outlets, routine threats from the state, the police, and vested groups, sustained intimidation, tax raids, cancellation or withholding of license are only some of the ways in which the supposed freedom of press in India is threatened. Regular harassment of journalists in the Indian languages in Tier 2, Tier 3, and rural India is rampant. A lot of it is not even known very much. A single tweet against the chief minister in Uttar Pradesh can land you up in jail. Journalists such as Gauri Lankesh and others have been murdered in broad daylight with very little clarity still on who the perpetrators were. The rhetorical question then that our panelists will try and attempt to answer is whether the press in India is really free. Moderating the specially curated media series
with Roli Pulse and Newslaundry is Abhinandan Sekhri.
And Abhinandan is going to be in conversation with Naresh Fernandes, Dhanya Rajendran, and Siddharth Varadarajan.
Naresh Fernandes is editor at Scroll.in. Dhanya Rajendran is founder and editor-in-chief at Newsminute.
Siddharth is the founding editor at The Wire. Abhinandan is co-founder at Newslaundry.
And for those of you watching this discussion, please support and subscribe to Scroll,
Wire, Newslaundry, Newsminute, and support the free press. So welcome to this discussion, Naresh, Dhanya, Siddharth, and Abhinandan. Abhinandan, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, thanks. As a news professional, I find it important to point out that this entire lack of freedom that news has is a perennial problem in our country. In fact, I'll just tell you where we have been on the World Press Freedom Index. We are particularly bad this year. It's 142. Last year we were 142. Before that we were 138. So we slipped. Before that we were 136. Before that we were 133. So we slipped. Before that we were 136. So basically 5 years ago we apparently became better. And before that we were 140. So there, it's been moving between 122, 131, 140, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 10 years ago we were 105. So we've slipped 40 points in about 10 years. But we were never great. So just want to put that at the outset. I want to start with Dhanya. Dhanya, what do you think is unique to the kind of pressures we face now as news professionals, as opposed to the kind of pressures one faced earlier? Is it different in how it is manifested, or has just the nature of pressure changed?
I think there are 2 or 3 ways in which we are being pressured, all media houses for that matter. I don't believe that media has been totally independent right from the beginning, because it's either patronage or there's advertising. There's some kind of pressure on most media houses, right? So that continues even now. The other issue is most, at least state governments and even the central government, for example, Andhra Pradesh has actually passed a government order saying it is asking all the departments under the government to sue media houses if they believe some publication has published something which is against the government or fake news. So governments are legitimizing intimidating tactics. That is one. Second is this overall pressure through social media. That's something which has happened over the last 5 or 6 years, or even a little before that. That once a story is published, there's an ecosystem which just goes after journalists, publications, and then now we see that cases are also filed on the basis of what this ecosystem says. So that echo chamber says. So I think in different ways, pressure is being exerted on the media by various governments.
So Naresh, is it different now? You've been in the space for a long time, probably longer than me and Dhanya also, although I'm not sure you look younger. But Sid is the veteran amongst us. But
did you just say you and me together?
No, you're much younger. So I'm just saying. But you've been in Bombay. You've been there during the Thackeray years. Is it different? And if so, how?
So yeah, I think the sense that we had over the last decade was that our main challenges would be commercial. How do we resist the pressures of advertisers and Newslaundry says this all the time. You know, if you depend on advertising, the advertiser dictates the kind of news that you publish. And I think for the last 4 or 5 years, what's really changed is the sense of an overt political pressure. As Dhanya said, that comes directly, sometimes from governments and from the ecosystem around the ruling party. When many of us think about the pressures that we face, we tend to ignore the fact that Kashmir has always faced pressures of this sort. And in a way, sort of the Kashmir model is being exported now to the rest of us. Kashmir journalists have faced physical intimidation from militants, from the government. Kashmir, there are publications that are very dependent on government advertising, which therefore dictates what they can do. And so I think when we think about our situation, we need to look a little more closely, perhaps, at what's happened up there in the north, and try to anticipate what we could possibly face. And the pressures since the abrogation, since the events of the last few months have only got more intense in Kashmir.
Okay, now Sid, you've been in Chennai. You've been the editor of one of the largest newspapers, English news dailies. Jayalalitha was famous for being rather unforgiving of any criticism about her in the press. Same question. What were the pressures like then? What are they like now? Other than that, there is an ecosystem that kind of legitimizes in the government's eyes that what we are doing is being received well. Just the same thing, the racist dog whistles today are more frequent because there is these tribes everywhere that get together and say, okay, fine, we are okay with that. Earlier, there were these filters where the thought elite would not allow that kind of rhetoric to kind of play out. Now it does. But other than that, do you feel that the way governments even come after news organizations has changed? And tell me about your experience during Jayalalitha, because I've heard many stories about, what a tyrant she was. Is that true, or do you have any run-ins?
Jayalalitha was easily one of the most intolerant chief ministers we've ever had in India as far as media freedom is concerned. And she regularly filed criminal defamation cases. She would get the Attorney General to file these cases against journalists, against editors. I was editor of The Hindu for around 3 years, and I think I collected 2 or 3 criminal defamation cases, one of which I finally got rid of just a few months ago when the Madras High Court basically quashed the case and in a way also pulled up the Tamil Nadu government for pursuing this kind of litigation. So her entire thing was that any news report which showed her in bad light and which so I remember one of these cases was a story where the Hindu, along with every other newspaper, had carried a fairly anodyne report of a DMK leader's allegations against her, where he basically said Jayalalitha is a highly inefficient chief minister and she pushes off for holiday instead of ruling the state, blah, blah, blah. Completely, like it's the sort of thing opposition and government frequently accuse each other of. And she filed this criminal case, and then I forget what the other story was. And there were other victims, like smaller newspapers, Tamil papers. She would go after politicians. So that was her. And I think the only chief ministers who rival her today in terms of having an extremely thin skin themselves and also their followers and supporters are Yogi Adityanath in Uttar Pradesh and Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal. the difference between the two, and which is what makes it kind of more dangerous for editors, is that in Tamil Nadu, if Jayalalitha wanted to go after you, she would do so. But it was pretty clear that she was the one who would direct this entire operation. So it wasn't really, you never had to worry about some random AI DMK guy filing an FIR somewhere with it was always, a signal from her directly. In the case of what's happening today, I mentioned Uttar Pradesh, I mentioned West Bengal, but virtually every state is that you now have, I think you use the phrase ecosystem or whatever, there are a whole bunch of politically motivated individuals who have taken it upon themselves to defend the honor of their chosen leader, and will think nothing of filing frivolous cases. And if their beloved chosen leader happens to be in power in the state, chances are that the police will go along with the filing of these silly cases, which, at the end of the day will not get very far in court, but, good luck to you fighting these charges for years on end. So I think the kind of harassment has become, I would say, it's more random, more systematic. But when I say random, more people are getting involved in doing this, and there is a method in the madness. I think that I see and fear greater resort to frivolous litigation on the part of political activists as a means of silencing reporters and editors and news platforms that they don't like.
Right. Now, I'd just like to, put this out there so that, it doesn't seem oversimplified, because often people say that, what about the emergency? What about India in 1980, 84, 86, 87? So I think for our audience, one should be clear that what democracy is in 2020 is not what democracy was in 1980. And that's not just in India, the world over. Whether it is, right to information or just the nature of public pressure. Like in the US, I was watching this town hall kind of thing in Florida where regular people could come and speak with the empowered medical committee that is set up by the town on whether they should be, whether mask wearing should be compulsory or not. So liberal values move forward. So I just want to make sure that our audience doesn't see that, we are saying wahan aisa tha, today it's better. 2020 has to be better technologically, but has it kept pace with the way things are moving all across the world? Now, on that, Dhanya, I was watching Maria Ressa's interview. It was on Hard Talk yesterday on the BBC. And I mean, she's doing a fantastic job of fighting Duterte and just the way he's come after Rappler and her. The point, I guess, the BBC interviewer was making was that he seems to have public support. Of course, she said not as much as it is visible because of bots. But she was talking about it is the job of courts, countermeasures to protect us from such things. On that front, do you think it is a failure? Is it a political failure of not being able to empower journalists more and more as year goes by instead of going backwards? Is it a failure of our citizenry not being able to stand up for the freedom of press? Or is it a failure of our checks and balances, such as judiciary, not being able to protect what is considered one of the pillars of democracy?
Around, I think 5-6 years ago, I still had belief in the citizenry that, for example, tomorrow, if someone even shoots me down, that the people of this country, there would be a lot of people who would be outraged. But after what happened to Gauri Lankesh, I strongly believe that it's a very small section of people who now want to stand up for the media or for journalists in particular. Whatever happens to journalists, whether it's a case filed against a journalist, whether it's physical assault, whether it's murder, we are seeing the voices among the citizenry really shrinking because there is so much of propaganda, right? That the media is fake, the media is feeding you wrong news. There is so much of propaganda against all the editors, for example, sitting in this very panel. So tomorrow, if something were to happen to any of you, the number of people who would have perhaps supported you around 5-6 years back, that's definitely shrunk in my opinion. Is the judiciary doing enough? See, as far as freedom of media is concerned, we have not had any recent cases. I mean, I can't remember a recent case in which the judiciary has failed us completely. For example, there was an editor who was arrested in Coimbatore last month because he wrote about how things were not going in the right way as far as what the Tamil Nadu government is doing on coronavirus and fighting the pandemic. But he was given bail by the magistrate. So there have been cases where the judiciary is at least given bail or intervened. But if a big case comes, I'm not exactly sure how the Supreme Court or even some of the high courts will behave these days, because some of the judgments, at least not not about the media, but in other cases, is not definitely giving me any sort of confidence.
Naresh, you want to weigh in on that? And with the additional aspect of bodies like the Editors Guild or the Broadcast Association, what can they do, or what do they do to empower journalists and journalism?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we need to have a set of guidelines framed for the police to decide when they will actually register an FIR against the journalist. And I think that's been the problem. They've been all too happy to register fairly frivolous cases, setting this whole process in motion. As you know, the process is the punishment. And so eventually it will get to a court, but there's a lot of pain involved in getting out of the legal process. So I think we need a clearer set of framework within which the police begins to operate. That's much more difficult these days, because who exactly is a journalist in the age of social media? And that's been one of the problems. But you know, what distinguishes, you know, Scroll and Newslaundry and The Wire from a Facebook post? And anyway, should a Facebook post be criminalized? So I think that's one of the problems. But I think also we need to see what's happening to us within the wider context of the crackdown against anybody who is seen to be questioning the government. So we have the Bhima Koregaon 11, for instance. We have the student activists arrested from Jamia and other places for the Delhi riots. I think this is all part of a continuum. And we all face the same pressures. And yes, I think we need greater public support, and we also need other political parties to come out and oppose this much more strongly. I don't think that's...
Is any political party really interested in a freer press, you think?
No, and I think that's been proved in this instance.
Sid, you want to comment on the bit about Editors Guild and such bodies? I'm sure you must have sat in these high-powered committees with all the big editors of the country deciding how we should get together. I mean, I remember there were those famous morchas that were taken out during the emergency. How united is the press? Forget what people think or political parties think. Even amongst the media, do you think there is enough of a critical mass which is effective and interested in standing up to the kind of intimidation that we face? And was it like that earlier?
Okay, so I was 9 when the emergency was declared. So
I know, not about the emergency. I know you're not that old.
I'm not. Jokes aside, I'm not a member of the Editors Guild. But I think that bodies like that or other journalists associations have a responsibility to speak out, and they are doing so. I think that the Editors Guild, particularly in the last year, has been quite active. And whenever I have got in touch with Editors Guild members to point out you know, an example of a journalist or a publication being harassed, by and large they've always acted promptly. And I think there is also heightened global visibility. There is you know, the South Asian Media Defenders Network. There is the IFJ. There is IFTU. There are lots of media organizations. Of course, RSF, and the fact is that these do make a difference. I think they do get noticed by the government to the extent to which the INB ministry has recently set up a committee to try to improve India's World Press Freedom ranking. I don't know how seriously they will engage with this problem, but I think that these statements they can and do matter. But at the end of the day, you know, it's a question of how responsive a government is, and in a democracy, one would hope that they are responsive, but sadly, the track record has not been very encouraging. But more importantly, how responsive the judiciary is, and I think that there's no need for us to agonize over how we classify journalists or how we classify a news portal, because we aren't asking for any special consideration for ourselves or any special laws. We're quite happy to abide by the laws of the land. But the fact is that the way these laws are being implemented by the police, misuse is rampant. If I were to cite the most recent example, two recent examples of the what I call the legal harassment of Supriya Sharma at Scroll and Vinod Dua at HW News. In the case of Supriya Sharma, I won't go into the details of what she reported, but the fact is that one of the charges is that she has spread disease. Now, what kind of a charge is this, and what kind of in my view, a police officer who puts this down in an FIR should, at the very least, be sent off for re-education, so that he understands what is the Indian Penal Code, what is the Indian Constitution, what are his powers as a police officer, and at the very worst should be suspended or sacked, because this is rampant abuse of the law. And I would say each of the sections that he has tried to apply in Supriya Sharma's case manifestly don't apply. Or you look at Vinod Dua. In Vinod Dua's case, you send, in the middle of the lockdown, you send policemen from Himachal Pradesh overnight. They land up at his house at 7 in the morning and say, you better come for, they summon him for questioning back in Himachal the next morning on the basis of a video program that he did where he questioned the partisanship of the Modi government and the Delhi police and the Delhi violence, something that we've all done and is amply documented. So I think the police officers who register these FIRs, unless the courts are willing, unless the courts get tough with these people, like one of the charges against Vinod Dua is sedition. Now the Supreme Court, we have 50 years of jurisprudence where the Supreme Court says sedition applies only when there is violence or the imminent threat of violence. By the FIR's own detailing against Vinod Dua, there is no such indication of violence. So I think if a police officer willfully disregards what the Supreme Court has been saying for 50 years, they should be hauled up. There should be some mechanism to, and I think were the courts to get tough with this kind of abuse of the law, of course we journalists would be beneficiaries, but so would ordinary citizens, students, activists of one kind or the other, even I would say politicians against whom these charges are freely applied when they are in the opposition. So I think that somewhere down the line there should be an understanding that look, adversarial politics is fine and everybody should play it. Don't involve journalists in your adversarial politics, and follow the rules of the road. Don't invoke sections of the law that are patently absurd. So I think that's really the need of our time. That somewhere down the line, the judiciary, which at one point was hyperactive and proactive in standing up for media freedom, today seems to have lost interest. And I think that at a time like this, when I think, was it you at Newslaundry or somebody documented 55 cases of journalists being harassed?
Yeah.
During COVID, I think the number may have gone up to 60 because it didn't include Supriya and maybe other examples that have come to light. Maybe it's 60 now. When you have so many examples at a time when the public expects journalists to function as their eyes and ears, the courts really need to take cognizance of this in some way and tell the government and police, whether it's at the central or the state level, that you can't do this.
Yeah, in fact, that article is now being turned into a tracker because, like you said, from the time we published it, within 5 days, there were more cases. So we figured we'll make it like similar to the HT hate tracker, journalist information tracker. Okay, Dhanya, this attack, one hears a lot about it on the English media, the Hindi media. Is the language media ignored on this? I mean, I know that there are, we did at the Media Rumble, there were a few reporters from local. In fact, there was one who was killed by the sand mining mafia. I think that was in Punjab yesterday, who reported for a local daily there. Uttarakhand. We had one case study at the Media Rumble from Punjab. I think there was river mining, that sand mining happening. Again, he was killed. These don't find that kind of resonance nationally. Is there a lack of coordination among news professionals across the country, across languages, to really stand together and want to take this on? Because surely in sheer numbers of organizations and professionals and resources, there is enough to really stand up for what is journalistically right, the principles of journalism. Do you think we have failed ourselves in that sense of not being able to get together on that?
Of course. And even when Siddharth was talking about how the Editors Guild has been responsive, I think even their access matters a lot. If we are from organizations, or if editors are able to access these associations like the Editors Guild, then they react. But every day, there are so many journalists who are being harassed, cases filed, people jailed, or even murdered once a month or twice in a month. But how many times does the Editors Guild or such organizations speak up? So a lot of reactions in India, including the reactions that we all have, depends upon who we know, who those journalists are, who do they work for. I want to go back to that Coimbatore case where many of us had signed a petition to the Chief Minister saying that the action should not have been taken, that journalists should be released. But I know the discussions which went behind the scene, even to prepare such a petition, saying that who is that person, should we support that journalist? Go by the merit of that particular report itself. The report was clearly about how a politician was ensuring that relief was not reaching people and how hospital facilities were not enough. Should a journalist be booked for that report and arrested for that? Of course not. But since he was working for a smaller organization, many of the journalists were not even sure whether they should be supporting that person. So I think as a community also, we do not come together most of the time, which of course is something that is utilized by a section of people who work against us. And that political party or that group can change in every case. Like today, it is a ruling party which is against you, but tomorrow it could be the opposition which is a ruling party. So the problem is the media needs to be more organized. We need to understand that things are not the same as it was perhaps 10 years ago, where like Siddharth was saying that it was Jayalalitha who used to file cases. The ministry used to file cases. I remember there are still cases registered against news anchors in Telugu, Tamil, etc. People who are simply reading from teleprompters. The policeman is not applying his brain when filing an FIR against a news anchor. So now we have moved from governments filing cases to random people, like 16 cases against a journalist, 160 cases against a journalist. Our enemies are more now. The people who distrust us are more now. So we need to be more organized, or this is going to become more and more difficult.
Naresh, this also relates to freedom of speech. And on that, I find myself dwindling now. And I'll explain why. And I'd like to get everyone's views on that before we wind up. Is that, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a lawmaker from Germany, and they were talking about the importance of freedom of speech and liberal values. And that's a country where, just certain symbols or certain actions are illegal because they hark back to Nazi Germany. And while I understand overall, they are very good on liberal values, I'm like, how do you reconcile the fact that you want to propagate liberal values in other parts of the world, like India, while in your own country, you can be jailed for merely saying something like Hail Hitler or something like that. So what I kind of got, and I had gone to Rwanda, and in Kigali, it's against the law to ask someone their caste, because the Hutu Tutsi thing, like what it led to. Today you can't even ask someone where you're from, and that's against the law. One big injustice leads to rules that everybody follows. So are we waiting for one big injustice so that there are limits to freedom of speech? Because that has to do with the kind of calls that are given for, like, the Gauri Lankesh case. A case can be made that was because of dog whistles and the kind of commentary that we saw on social media and even amongst many political leaders. So could you comment on both, on the media being organized And do we need to rethink freedom of speech in the digital age?
Yeah, I think the old structures of a media organization, the journalists' unions in each city, the Delhi Union of Journalists, the Bombay Union of Journalists, those have crumbled, especially with the onslaught of the contract system. And nothing has really replaced that. Again, many of those were sort of local city-based organizations. They were very effective in working across publications, but the multiplicity of media in each city and across the country, we're now so diverse, it's a challenge to think through how to link all of us. Even in the online world, some of us have been talking about, led by you, trying to think about how to start an online association. And we haven't even managed to get that going. So the challenges of getting everybody from literally Kashmir to Kanyakumari, to use the cliche, will take a lot of work. With regard to freedom of speech, yes, I think, sort of everybody thinks that we draw a clear line on hate speech. But even the notion of hate speech has so been inverted. When you look at the Delhi riots cases, for instance, what all of us see as a speech by Harsh Mandar telling students that, this battle must be fought using democratic means has now been called hate speech. So it's quite confounding to think about, when these definitions are literally turned on their heads, how do you draw the line? I think that would take a lot of discussion. Or maybe Siddharth has better ideas on this.
I'm coming around to the view that when it comes to free speech in a highly polarized political culture like our own, it's extremely dangerous to advocate criminalization of speech. Or if we do criminalize speech, the bar has to be really quite high. And I would say that the incitement to violence or imminent incitement of violence is where I would draw the line. I recognize that a lot of what is offensive dog whistle stuff would fall below the radar then. But if that is the price that we have to pay as a society to forestall frivolous counter litigation of the kind that Delhi police is doing against Harsh Mandar, or even Umar Khalid's speech before Trump's visit, where he talks about how the Modi Sarkar is destroying India, we have to unite India. If this kind of speech is going to be called seditious, then we have a problem. And I think that the more that we attempt to label speech that we don't like as hate speech or to criminalize it, the more we are laying ourselves open to a similar allegation being flung against us. And since the law works in favor of those who are politically powerful, it is critical voices against the establishment that are going to be suppressed. So in an ideal world, yes, one may have a different yardstick. But I think in today's India, I would rather err not resorting to filing an FIR. Like this, there's lots of things that offend us, right? For example, even the stupid comments and ignorant comments that I think this guy's name is Amish, a TV anchor who referred to Moinuddin Chishti as a Lutera, right?
Yeah.
Now, so I think he should be laughed at for being ignorant. He should be ridiculed. He should be made fun of. But do we really want to file an FIR and get into a prosecution and send the chap to jail? It's ridiculous. And similarly, a lot of other things that offend you or offend me or offend somebody else. I think we need to just chill and not resort to police tactics at the drop of a hat. I think this has become a serious illness right now in the right to free speech of, look, you and I, we get harassed, but we can still deal with it. Imagine the chilling effect that is happening on people who are using social media now, I recognize that a lot of filth and garbage and intimidation and communalism happens on social media behind the veil of anonymity. But a lot of satire, a lot of people venting, social media has given them a platform. You don't want to criminalize that, or even if you want to encourage, good ethics, good behavior, good online etiquette. The way to do that is not to send people to jail or to threaten them with cases. I feel very strongly about this, and I think that we've really allowed things to get out of hand in this country. Where all kinds of cases are filed purely as a form of harassment.
But I just like to pick your brains because you all run digital organizations, as do I. This is clearly not unique to India. Like I was saying, of course, ironically, we are even below Philippines on the Press Freedom Index. And Mr. Duterte the whole world sees what he's doing. In fact, Maria Ressa was on the cover of Time. So just for our audience, we are below Philippines, where this man said that, the kind of terror campaign he ran in, cleaning the streets of drug lords and many other. Philippines Human Rights Commission has said that the amount who died are almost 6 times more than what they claimed. But it's clearly not just an Indian problem. You see Bolsonaro, you see Trump, you see Duterte. There seems to be media or news media is the enemy of the people. What is it? Is it a byproduct of the digital age that we had never thought of? We hadn't, identified or diagnosed. Why is it happening around the world together? Can you think of a reason? Would you hazard a guess as to why this is happening, Dhanya?
I really don't know. In the sense, when the Sabrimala season started and women were allowed to go to Sabrimala, one of my journalists were beaten up. She was assaulted. And there were a lot of women journalists on the first and second day when women started going to Sabrimala. A lot of people were assaulted, a lot of women journalists, at least 6 or 7. In my own family groups, people, including my own father, my uncles, are like, why should journalists go there? They should get beaten up. This is the kind of hatred, blanket hatred and mistrust on journalists and journalism, which I just don't understand. And I had to remind them that in their group, there was a woman journalist who's also an editor, whose journalist has got assaulted. Still, they did not go back on their words. So I think it's heavily entrenched in their minds now. And there is this massive confusion which has been created that any media house that reports against a government or the army is also against the country. So that, I know so many people who have now started believing that anyone who criticizes the government is also against the country. These people had no problem when there was another government in power and the same media houses criticized the government. So, and when more and more people start thinking that way, their trust in the media has gone on. It's not, and I'm not saying the media has behaved perfectly in all these years. Yes, there has been a lot of issue as far as how the media has behaved, but that hatred is so entrenched now that I'm not really sure how we are going to convince all these people that government, a politician, India, army are all not the same, and they are all liable to be criticized. And it's okay to criticize each one of these people or things or entities.
Yeah, Naresh, why world over? The only common factor is the internet, the digital age, social media. What has led to this coordinated assault on news media?
Well, I think it's a product of the age of anxiety where we all really want to rest our hopes in these authoritarian figures, and we believe that they have all the answers. Nothing they can do is wrong. And for these authoritarian figures, it's important that there's only one message that gets out. It's their message. They have convinced people that they are talking directly through them, to them, and that the media is some sort of distorted filter, if anything. Everybody wants to speak their man ki baat. And of course, then this is accompanied by a concerted campaign to discredit the media, to suggest that anything that questions the view of this benevolent authoritarian figure who knows what is right for us, that the media is the enemy. I mean, we've seen this all over. Trump parking fake news at the New York Times and CNN, Bolsonaro, as you've listed all of them, in the Philippines. And this is a completely astonishing thing, as Dhanya pointed out. For the first time, people sort of really want to believe in this one figure, and believe that the media that questions this figure is the enemy. And there is a small group of people, they read us, as we know, all of us on this call, and they're passionate in their defense of democratic values. And we can just hope that their voices grow louder, and that the information they get from us will empower them.
Sid, why now? Why across the world?
It's very simple. I mean, essentially, if all populist leaders believe in, the military goal of full spectrum dominance, you want to, you cannot allow any counter or challenge to your power, whether it be from the opposition, whether it be from the judiciary, whether it be from other independent or quasi-independent institutions like the Election Commission or CAG, RBI, whatever it is, and of course the university system and the media. So all of these are targets, and it doesn't surprise me that that Trump and Modi unite. Modi is much more clever than Trump, so he does not openly attack the media. There are other people who do it for him. But the fact is that they have their own channels of communication which they use. They are at least Trump holds or has held press conferences where he takes questions after a fashion. Modi has avoided doing that, and increasingly it becomes impossible to, like, for any routine story to get any kind of government response from a minister or a top bureaucrat as to why a certain, other than the MEA, which does regular briefings, no ministry has designated spokespersons to whom you can put simple queries. So the fact is that they have put themselves above questioning. They believe in direct one-way communication, and they see any criticism of them as a hostile act. I mean, the Solicitor General went so far as to run down high courts because they were passing strictures against various aspects of the lockdown. So this is the reality, and I have to say that among all the populist sort of regimes, the media in India has it worst, because in the US, they have more than 200 years of constitutional protection, and the system functions in a fairly robust fashion. In Brazil, to the best of my knowledge, the media has not been subjected to the kind of attack, legal and other kinds of attack that we have. But here, it's kind of a free-for-all right now, open season on the media. And I think that in many ways we have, we have pulled the shortest straw as far as the populism stakes are concerned. And we have a major fight on our hands going forward over the next few years.
Right. On that note, I'd like to thank Naresh, Dhanya, and Siddharth. I focused this conversation on the freedom of the media as opposed to ad influence, government influence, because on the ad influence, I'm basically talking all the time. So I'd also like to take this opportunity to tell all the people watching this, do subscribe to the News Minute, the Wire, the Scroll, and Newslaundry. We do want to empower and strengthen ourselves based on your contribution and your subscriptions or your donations, whatever the case may be. Because when there is a critical mass of the people who believe that they have a right to the truth and they have a right to good journalism, it is enough to hold a large, powerful government in place. But that can't be done without, just like governments are completely weak without some people backing them, news organizations are completely weak without a lot of people backing them in the absence of other institutional frameworks and organizations and entities. On that note, thanks Chirag for putting this together. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and hope to see you again soon.